What is up, my fellow Vikings? So, the Siege of Paris DLC from Assassin's Creed Valhalla has been with us for around a week now, giving me enough time to complete the main storyline quests and give you guys an honest review on whether it's worth making that all-important purchase. It's worth mentioning that at the moment you can only buy the DLC by purchasing the Season Pass, which also includes the first Wrath of the Druids DLC, which I'll mention a little, but primarily this is all about the Siege of Paris. I'll try not to include story spoilers in this video, but I'll obviously be showcasing some of the characters without giving anything away. I'm going to split this review into 4 parts, starting with the story and characters, the combat, new weapons and abilities, the addition of the black box missions, and then finally the overall feel of the game and whether I think it's worth parting with your hard-earned cash. So if you fancy, feel free to skip ahead in the timestamps below and let's get into it. So starting with the storyline, much like Wrath of the Druids, you're introduced to the idea of going to Paris by your new chums Toka and Pierre, who ultimately explain that the power in France is growing and one day this could have dire consequences for England and the clan of Ravensthorpe. Without giving much away, you are then introduced to a variety of Paris characters. The majority of French characters are all heavily influenced by the church, and the Vikings of the area are led by the hulking warlord Sigurfred, who has a bone to pick with the Franks. Now, I actually enjoyed the majority of storyline quests and characters in the main game, particularly the Hunwald and Ivar arc in Lincolnshire. Remember that poor old sod? And in my opinion, the story in the Siege of Paris is much stronger. I actually felt surprised at moments. It kept me guessing with where I thought the storyline was going to end, and there were some really enjoyable boss battles against some of these antagonists. The King, Charles the Fat in particular, is arguably the best character in the entire game, and I felt that I paid more attention to what this mean old king was getting up to, more so than any other character. Whilst this DLC clocked in at around 12 to 15 hours of main storyline quests, with all of the added extras scattered around Paris, I was pretty darn happy with its length. So now moving on to the combat and new weapons. Much like the Wrath of the Druids DLC which introduced sickles into the game, this brings us an entire new weapon, the Scythe, as well as more one-handed swords, giving you the opportunity to dual wield them if you fancy. I actually played with dual one-handed swords the majority of the game, and they are incredible. Super fun to use with some fantastic animations, and it's just a shame they didn't include these in the base game, but I'm hugely grateful they're here now. The Scythe is also enjoyable to use, but realistically, it's something you'll likely pick up for a few hours and then never use again. They do make you look like the Grim Reaper though, so if that's the vibe your Eivor is going for, well worth using. Alongside new weapons, they've also added a new type of enemy, which are mounted horsemen. Now they do look awesome, and they do add a different feel to the combat, but they aren't prevalent everywhere, and you'll likely come into contact with them while roaming around. While it does add something new, it's a shame Eivor doesn't also have the ability to fight on horseback, and taking these guys down can be an issue as they're tough to hit with arrows and just not the easiest to attack head on. Also, why haven't they added a crossbow? I can't imagine this would have been too difficult to do, and the game isn't obviously going for historical accuracy, so why not add them in? I do wonder if this was discussed with the game's developers, as I'm convinced a lot of the story and the game are based on the 2 TV shows Vikings and The Last Kingdom, and you can watch the actors involved in both the games and the show in my previous video if you fancy. All I know is that you have a bunch of Viking fans playing a game called The Siege of Paris. The TV show Vikings had an entire season dedicated to taking the city, which was heavily defended by crossbowmen. I think they missed a trick here. They've also added 3 new abilities just like Wrath of the Druids. The Rat Swarm allows you to summon hordes of rats on your enemies, which are great for distraction. Ghoul Breath, which allows you to poison your enemy from afar, making them sick and scaring their guard chums. And the Golden Flame ability, which in my opinion is the best, where you stick an explodable device on the enemy. These are all welcomed additions, though in all honesty I don't see myself using them much of the time, perhaps except the Golden Flame, which is really useful against those stronger enemies. I appreciate they want you to spend your money, but all of these additions I've mentioned I think they would be worth including in the main game. It's worth mentioning that I play this on the absolute hardest mode possible, the combat difficulty and the level scaling both on max difficulty. I just like a challenge. Moving on to the black box missions. If you're a fan of the older Assassin's Creed games, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. These quests are all about giving you choices in how you assassinate someone, and you can do this in a variety of ways. You can infiltrate to get up close to your enemy, perhaps use your surroundings and other characters to take them out, or just charge in screaming "Odin is with us" like you normally would. The point is that you now have that choice, and much like the one-handed swords, it's a shame they didn't include this option in the main game. A lot of fans' hesitations about Valhalla is that it isn't like the older Assassin's Creed games, and don't get me wrong, it is completely different. But I think that by adding these in from the start, you would have made more of the fans happy. Just a suggestion for next time, Ubisoft. All in all though, playing these black box missions reminds me of the old games, and I'm thoroughly glad they've been included again. So much so, I may even go and replay them. And although these aren't black box missions, they've also added a new feature called Rebel Missions, which I felt was worth mentioning. These are basically a bunch of side quests given to you by your new pal Pierre, which sees you join rebel soldiers to take out the Frankish opposition. By completing these missions, you'll then receive upgrades to train up your squad, taking them from peasants with pitchforks to soldiers with swords. Again, a nice addition to the game, but overall it's not going to make too much difference aside lengthening your playtime. So there's a quick summary of all the main changes, and now for the score. Overall, the story and new characters are a really great addition, and I may have found this DLC to be the most enjoyable aspect of the entire game. The one-handed swords are absolutely brutal and a must-have for die-hard fans, and the black box missions are a welcomed return to Assassin's Creed. I should also mention that you could almost parkour your way throughout the entire city of Paris without touching the ground, which is something you can't do in any other aspect of Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Whilst it's not perfect, if you're a fan of the main game and are wondering whether to make the purchase, do it. You won't be disappointed. A solid 8/8.5 out of 10 score for me. I do appreciate that this season pass also includes the Wrath of the Druids DLC, which personally I don't rate as highly, though I still found it enjoyable. You can't buy one without the other, I'm afraid, so if you're really unsure, perhaps wait until the season pass goes down in price, which I'm sure towards Christmas time it most definitely will. And if after all that none of it sways you, you also get a free bear mount to roam around on. Life in Francia doesn't get much better than this. Thanks for watching guys, I really hope this review helps you make the decision as to whether buying the season pass is worth it, and if it does then a like and a comment below would hugely help out my channel. And if you want to see new games and more Assassin's Creed bits with me, then just hit that subscribe button. I will hopefully catch you legends in the next one.